Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. Today's episode is sponsored by Universal Studios, and we are actually here on the line. So thank you, Universal. Today's special guest is Oppenheimer costume designer Ellen Mirojnick. She returns to the Designing Hollywood show. I've interviewed you once. You've been on before that.
Yeah.
You're one of my favorite people in the world, not just as a costume designer, but one of the great careers, which we're going to get to. It is so great to have you back to this show.
It's such a pleasure to be back.
And every time, you along with Marilyn Vance, whose podcast this is, in the 80s, like, I'm not a fashionista, but I started recognizing costume designers' names because of the clothes.
Right.
And I'm like, and you were one of them. And I never knew how to pronounce your last name properly until we actually met. But we were just talking about the fact that of all the costume designers I've interviewed, you are a zeitgeist costume designer. You just told me a story about how a previous podcaster called you the original influencer.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the work, I think about the mid to late 80s, both Wall Street and Fatal Attraction were not just movies. They were pop culture events. And your work on Wall Street, I mean, the depth, the clothes, I mean, you influenced a movie about Wall Street, then your movie became the de rigueur. Those are the clothes that the power brokers wore for the next. Everyone wanted to be Gordon Gekko.
Everybody wanted to be Gordon Gekko. And when I received a call, I think the movie was released in December of that year. And I was on a movie and I received a call in January. And it was from the editor of the Los Angeles Times fashion desk, maybe, or some editor from the Los Angeles Times. And she said, I want to ask you a question. And I said, what is it? She said, how did you do this? And I said, well, what are we talking about? And she said, every single man wants to be Gordon Gekko. I'm walking along Rodeo Drive. I'm walking along Wilshire Boulevard. I'm walking in Santa Monica. I'm walking in East LA. Everybody has their hair slicked back. They're wearing braces. They have ties that actually are contrary to the shirts and sometimes plaid suits. So they just want to be him. And I said, and he was the evil one.
Wow.
I said, so
was he?
He was a representative of what we would have become. But that being said, he was the bad guy.
Right.
He was the bad guy. And I said, she said, but what do you think it is? I said, seduction. It's seduction. That's what it is. And when there's an element of seduction, when there's an element of, ooh, that's like sexy, cool, seduction, not sexy so much, but seduction, I think most people relate.
Well, and it's interesting because in terms of seduction, then you took Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas then became, we talked in our last interview, I'm a huge Basic Instinct acolyte. Can I be an acolyte of a movie?
I guess so.
And we talked about that. I got to ask you about that V-neck sweater he's wearing in the club. I won't ask you about it again. But then again, Fatal Attraction, Black Rain, all of those things, they became, it almost was like the clothes that you were ahead of the curve. And the clothing styles that you pioneered, I think, leapt off that screen and suddenly found their way into popular culture.
I think that there's something that happens. It happened to me. It happens to others as well. I'm not the only one that it happens to. Is that there's something that you relate to in terms of maybe it's otherworldly. It might be otherworldly. It's a presence that you're not aware of. There's a thought that travels through you that you're not aware of when you read the material, and when you know who's behind the camera, or how you relate to it. I think first and foremost, it's how you relate to it before you know the who, what, where, how, and when. And it's kind of an otherworldly feeling. that you must be part
Hmm.
of the project. You must contribute in some way. And I don't know why I say yes. I don't say yes because, oh, this could be pop culture. I don't say yes because, um, maybe I say yes because it's a director that I've really wanted to work with. That would be the most. That would be like number one reason. But I say yes because I like the material. I say yes because there's some other feeling that's traveling through my existence. I live in two worlds. I live in the real world, but I really live in kind of the spirit world.
I mean, I can see that. It's, you know, I think about the movies that you've worked on that I love. We were talking about Strange Days. Again, an acolyte. Can you be an acolyte of a movie? Strange Days is a movie I've seen way too many times. I love Ray Fiennes' character. You know, Lenny Nero and the way he dresses. I don't know how you, but it's kind of a future punk that never really happened.
Yeah.
I was like, because you know, the movie was '95, but it's set in the 2000,
It was like it was at
yeah, the end of this
New Year's
millennium,
Eve,
New Year's Eve.
99.
And so it's only like 5 years in the future, but in a way it looks almost Blade Runner-y, like it's a lot further
But
in
you know
terms of
how,
it.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you know why this happened the way it did in this kind of 5-year period, right? There's two things. One is that it couldn't take place in the far future.
Right.
It just couldn't, because there was a melding of many different cultures and a melding of lots of different elements in the city of Los Angeles. So you couldn't set it, you couldn't predict it to happen 20 years from 1995. You had to do, and besides which, a story point, very importantly, was New Year's Eve of the turning of the millennium.
Yeah.
So you had to like do something that would kind of indicate a meld in some way, a meld of cultures, a meld of different influences, etc. A meld of nothing that was really contemporary, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Um, but it wasn't futuristic. So you had to find that fine balance. And there was another film that I did, Face Off, that
John Woo's Face Off.
John Woo's Face
With
Off
Nicolas Cage,
with
John
Nicholas,
Travolta.
yes, and
Fantastic.
and and that movie. When I went to interview for that movie, a friend of mine was the production designer, Neil Spizak, and he's a hugely talented guy. They'd been working on this film for a little bit of time, and John Woo, God bless his soul, he would like really sit at the table, and Terry was his kind of his producer and translator a bit when he didn't want to understand something. Anyway, so I said to them, "Oh, they were telling me that there's not that much money." So I said, "Well, that's okay that it's not that much money, but I have a really big question to ask you. And you might not want to hire me, Neil. You're going to be pissed off. But why is this in the future when this could happen tomorrow? So can we not real like what cars are you going to have on the street? What the and I started to roll off a lot of different questions that went money, 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 money. And they just turned, and Barry Osborne, who's the producer, said, "So when would you set it, Ellen?" I said, "I would set it right now." And I said, "But you could have future elements. But you could have future elements. But I would set it now because what car is he going to get into?"
Right.
And it's kind of, you navigate that those ideas.
But you did good, like the suits when you first meet Nicolas Cage's character,
Mhm.
Castor Troy, in that movie. He's got the colors you chose.
What kind of iridescent-y.
Yes, and they were immediately sort of interesting. And like in Strange Days, what people forget about that movie is you have the record industry,
Yes.
you know, and you've got rappers, you
Right.
have cops,
Yeah.
then you've got basically a drug dealer who's selling his squid-based
Right.
technology, and you've got Angela Bassett, who's never looked better
Yeah.
as Mace, the
Yeah,
bodyguard.
yeah.
She's unbelievable. So you have all these different, like you said, LA cultures clashing in this movie that wouldn't necessarily normally clash in the way that they did, but all of them have very distinct wardrobe choices. Like it's just weird that somebody would have this beautiful black woman as their bodyguard, dressed almost like a modern samurai,
Hmm.
and like who is that character? Like,
Hmm.
does that character really exist in life? Probably not.
Probably
But
not, but it's a
it's I know, and it's
movie.
awesome, you can't help but fall in love with her because she's so spectacular
Yeah,
in that
she is.
film. But then you're looking at Lenny Nero's suits, and they're like punk, tech, like they almost are from a different era. And then Sizemore's just a schleppy cop, and he's not schleppy, but
Right.
he's creepy and weird. But we
He was
filmed that.
creepy and weird.
Yeah, but you nail it all, and I love the confluence of all of that design work, but it all works together. I mean, it was
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
no, I mean, but that's one of the reasons that movie. You were talking about Catherine Bigelow being an incredible visual stylist, but I think that's something you bring to the worlds because you did the same thing in Starship Troopers. On one hand, you've got this weird futuristic
Yeah.
civilization that all these beautiful young people exist to be maimed and torn apart by the bugs. All the adults in that movie are like they have their limbs cut off and like the mobile infantry made me the man I am today. And you look down and they have no legs. I mean, you did a great job with like all the parents, like you are not going to join the mobile infantry. You have to go to whatever. And I love the fact that you created this futuristic, waspy, Connecticut culture
Right.
in Rio de Janeiro or Argentina or the hell they are. Where? What? But the clothes were awesome in that movie.
Thank you.
And
Thank
then
you.
you've still got the armor and the space.
And the uniforms were that it was pretty. They had also worked on that film for quite some time before I came in, and then of course we had to do our research as well in terms of the armor and what the suits would look like and what they practically could wear because so much of it was practical. It was
Right.
not on a green stage totally. It was in cold North Dakota, I believe, or South Dakota. I forget right now. Um, but it was a very interesting challenge. But working with Paul Verhoeven was always an interesting challenge. And he was such a truth teller that if it didn't, under any circumstances, register as the truth in his story, then it wasn't working.
Yeah, I mean, but I've always just loved the work that you've done because you do bring something. You bring something that's kind of heightened, the heightened reality to it. It's
Yeah.
like with Wall Street and Fatal Attraction, it's definitely set in the real world, but there's something that elevates it.
I understand what you mean, and maybe it's because maybe it's because when I love contemporary work as much as I do, and I really really loved it at that time even more so, and so I always felt that watching a film, you were in an altered reality.
No
And
matter
so,
what.
no matter what the story, you were in an altered reality and you had to be transported someplace else to watch that screen and not think about what did you leave at home that you forgot at home, right? So, when watching that, I always thought, and it was just part of my thinking, I always thought that you had to elevate it you had to elevate whatever we were talking about to a level of mystical illusion.
Wow. Okay, I love that.
And so that's just how my brain operates. That's just how it's made. It's made up of pieces that kind of go click, 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 click. And sometimes it's perfect and sometimes it's not. But that's
Mystical
big.
illusion.
It's mystical illusion. You're watching this thing. So you have to be transported some other place to really be involved with the story.
Well, that kind of now I've got a whole. It's now I'm looking at all your work in my head, seeing how because I've always loved things there's some people that have a slavish devotion to period. It has to
Mhm.
be exactly like this.
Oh, you hired
You
the wrong
know,
one. You can't hire me for that.
well, that's what and the thing is, if you wanted to do that, doesn't give you that mystical illusion. And when you're watching a movie, everything is fake. So to sit there and go, these are exactly period authentic costumes, like, well, it was light never shined in the past the way it's shining on these people right now. So why do you have to make it exact? And I've always liked it when people
Cheat a little.
a little bit,
Uh-huh. Well, I think that, I never really had the opportunity. Well, early on I did in with Chaplin. Okay.
right?
We covered what 8 periods of time in that film, or 6 periods of whatever, 6 to 8 periods of time in that film. And at that time, I really did try to be as accurate as possible
Sure,
because we're telling a story that has much research, and we're telling the part that was most thrilling to do was the black and white films that we had to do within the films, the
right.
films that he directed and created, and just to do that type of black and white work within a color frame was such a great challenge, and such a great to work with that grayscale and be that specific. I think
Mhm.
that was probably the most specific I've ever been in a period film, but really specific because you had to hit every single color, every single detail so that it didn't distract nor take you out of the film. You had to be
Okay.
watching that.
So now you find yourself again. We talk about zeitgeist movies and things you've been involved with. I don't think when the history of cinema is written that there won't be a chapter at least on the summer of 2023. And what
A
happened?
question.
What happened in the summer of 2023 with two movies that couldn't be more disparate, both, however, very fashion conscious. But you found yourself working on Oppenheimer with one of the most exacting and meticulous filmmakers, one of the most beloved. I mean, when people talk about auteurs today, Christopher Nolan's at the top of that
Without a
list.
question.
And I going from Following to Memento, and when he got his first gig doing a remake of Insomnia at Warner
Mhm,
Brothers, they said, "Oh, this kid's got promise here, do
mhm,
Batman."
mhm.
And now watching Dunkirk, which that movie Dunkirk made $500 million.
Right.
This British story. I mean, I'm sure the Warner Brothers is like, "Well, we'll let you do this, Chris," but nobody in America knows what this movie is. Cut to $500 million. So now you're making a story. I can't even imagine if any other filmmaker could never have got this movie made,
I don't think so.
but Christopher Nolan. And not only did he make this movie, as you know, it's in grand fashion, shot in IMAX. It's an overwhelming cinematic achievement with people.
Mhm.
I don't think there's ever been a more exciting movie made with people talking in rooms.
I've never worked on one. This was the most exciting film to work on. To work with Chris Nolan, Chris Nolan, God bless his soul, I think is one of the most talented human beings on the planet. And
And probably also one of the best dressed.
he's yes, he is a very, very dapper gentleman. And I think that Chris is extraordinary. And I always had when I met him, I did share this with him
What
because,
was it like to meet him? How did that first meeting come about?
well, my agent called and said, Chris Nolan is seeing. I guess Chris Nolan is seeing costume designers, and they want to meet you. And I said, really? Why? That's what I said. Really? Why? And he said, well, you're going. And I said, oh, okay, fine, whatever. And I think I was the last one to meet him of the costume designers that he met. And a couple of weeks later, they don't give you the material. This is a go see. This is a
Did
go
you know what
see.
it was?
I knew what it was, but this is a go see. This is a meet and greet only. That's it. So I listened to the American Prometheus a bit. And what I discovered was, well, of course, Chris Nolan is making this movie. He is Oppenheimer. It is the same spirit. It is the same spirit. They rip things apart. It's fission and fusion. this is Chris Nolan's theme, always fission and fusion, fission and fusion. So, okay, so I went to the meeting and I said to him, I said, Chris, I've always really, really admired all of your work. And I think sometimes people don't think it's very emotional, but I beg to differ. And he's looking at me and going, really? Okay, why? And I said, because the amount of water that you have in each one of your films. I don't mean Dunkirk. I'm not talking about
No, the
Dunkirk.
beginning of Inception. There's a lot of water in that
water.
movie.
It's water. And he looked at me and I said, well, water indicates emotional content. So you don't have to speak it. You feel it. And he just sat back in his chair. And then I said, not reading American Prometheus fully, I've listened to it a bit. I realized that this is your movie. This is your theme, fission and fusion. You rip apart everything that you make to put it back together in your own way. Time doesn't matter. It is all about telling a story that you have kind of ripped it 6 ways till Sunday or whatever the expression is, and then it's yours because you fuse it in a totally different way. And he went, "Mhm." Then we talked about other directors, and that was it.
Did he have some of your work that he particularly enjoyed?
Well, yes, he did really, really share a lovely, lovely compliment, and that was, he said, "I see you've done the Nick. It was the best, most beautiful thing that I have ever seen. Great work."
That was Soderbergh's show that he did for television.
Yes.
Again, period. It was a great show.
It was a beautiful show. It was a beautiful, and I think it was, I think that he said that in the press because Howard Cummings also was aware of it. And Jonah, who Howard worked for many, many, he took over Westworld and has worked with him since. Jonah didn't like the fact that Chris said, "Oh no, The Nick is the best looking show on television."
Well, at least he's honest.
But he did say, and he went, and I had worked with a lot of people that obviously he was friends with and he knew, and I think it was not a very, very long meet and greet. It was about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something of that nature. They just talked about some practicality, and that was about it.
How long from after that meeting, how long was it before you got the call saying you got the job?
Well, that was Monday, and I got the call on Wednesday.
Nicely done. So,
and then I said, "Oh, really?" I did say, "Oh, really?" And Paul Hook said, "What do you mean, oh, really?" "Yes, really."
Okay, so now that was some great insight you have for Nolan.
Mm-hmm.
So with a director of his stature and where he's at in the industry, and knowing that he's going to shoot with IMAX cameras and
no, I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't?
I didn't know anything.
Oh, you didn't? Not at all. Oh, well, so how did you begin? Now that you get this call, what do you do? What do you do when you are now working for Christopher Nolan, presumably at the time or now, maybe forever, the greatest director that's working today?
Agree 100%.
How do you start doing this? First of all, are you scared? Are you nervous? Is it just like another day at the office for you?
No, I'm intrigued is the word. I'm really intrigued. But, you get the job. I think it would be helpful if you read the script. So the first thing that you do is read the script.
Would they give it to you?
You go to the office and read it.
Okay.
And the script was 187 pages. And it took a while to read and digest clearly. It was a little helpful that I did have some background of American Prometheus.
Right.
So it kind of gave me a flavor going in, and then reading this first person script, it was, I have to say, it was challenging in the same way it is to read a musical script. it's it's a bit, you're reading a story, but you're reading a story as if you're watching a film in a way, or you're watching something. There's another element involved,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. And Oppenheimer was an amazing script. I mean, I think I had to go to the office 2 or 3 times to actually let it just wash within me. And after that, we had a meeting. We had a meeting, Emma and Chris and myself. And I also had done I do these little booklets and stuff so that it's helpful to me to kind of put it in order and make
Yeah,
things
because you're jumping through time and we're
right.
covering decades.
Right. So one of this you might like this little tale. So I go to this meeting and I go, well, so I'm going to work for Chris Nolan and I'm actually going to do a period film because up to this point I have done period films of the recent past, discounting the Nick, that were kind of mashups in a way. They were their own worlds, right? I was so excited. Now I could finally do a period movie. We have this meeting, and it was it was great. All of the images were set forth in front, and we talked, greatly about them and stuff. And what I noticed really quickly was that Oppenheimer's shape, the silhouette, was always the same from the time he began till the day we last see his last photograph. The shape, his silhouette is the same, and we spoke of that. And most of the photographs were in black and white, and one was in color, but we didn't know if it was colorized.
Right.
And I said, well, let's put him in a blue shirt, any color blue. We'll have multiple different color blues. Happy, fine, and the silhouette, fine. And we just talk about other things. And he said, Ellen, I don't want this to be a studied film. I don't want it to be studied. And I understood what he meant. What that meant was exactly what you were saying, not precious, not so specific that it takes away from watching a film,
Right.
right? So I said, okay. He said, I certainly don't want the extras to be in. Okay, now they're in yellow, and now they're in. But I don't want that. I don't want it studied at all. I said, all right, fine. And then he said, it might be a good idea. I don't think I remember the words exactly, but I'll give you the essence. I think it'd be a good idea to kind of, we'll always know what period of time we're in, whether it's the architecture or the place and so on. But maybe why don't you do something that a younger audience can relate to? And I went, oh, I have to do the mashup again. I have to do the. I'm standing in front of Chris Nolan. He's suggesting that I not be perfect. And I said, all right, fine. What was I going to say? But I then went on to digest all of the material as best as I could and understand that when Los Alamos came about, he really was. This is also working with Ruth DeJong, who's a wonderful, wonderful production designer. She and I were the newbies to the block,
Right.
and
Joining the Christopher Nolan circus.
yes, and knowing what that is like, which is very different than most. It is very different than most. It is very different in their participation, in their attention to everything. Um, I think it's the only way to be now. And that being said, we talked about Los Alamos and the building of Los Alamos to be as if it was his Western, and which it wasn't in a sense. Um, and that we also talked about how the worlds work together on how they move. And then it was really about just doing the work. And the first test that I had, I call it my test, but it was work. It was Thanksgiving of that year of preparation when I think I began the very beginning of November. And now we were at Thanksgiving, and on that Wednesday afternoon at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I received an email saying that Killian was going to be in town on Monday following the holiday, and that Chris and Emma would like to do a fitting. And on Tuesday, we're going to put him on film. And I went, what? Okay. Well, you're not going to stress about it over the weekend. It's nothing you can do.
Right,
And
right.
I didn't make any calls to Universal nor any other costume house to say, will you open for me, please? No, we're going to have to wait till Monday morning. And on Monday morning, we had to immediately attack the silhouette of Oppenheimer. And Killian, I never talked to Killian. Didn't have any image of Killian at this moment in time. And so we brought a whole bunch of things in the nature that we spoke of. And there we were with, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe a dozen suits or pieces of suits with lots of clips and stuff. And I happened to have found a hat. And of course, the hat. Oh, I didn't tell you this part. In that first meeting, the most important comment was, and this was Chris's note, and this was odd talking, and I really mean that from the bottom of everybody's hearts.
Right.
No one is to wear hats but Oppenheimer. I don't want any hats in the film. And I said, but you like Einstein's? He said, yeah, that's a story point.
Right.
No hats in the film, not one person. I went, oh, okay. What are you going to say? What are you going to say? You're wrong? No, you're going to say, well, how that's another piece that you're going to have to work with in some way. And if you're going to get hung up on it, you're the wrong person.
Interesting.
You're the wrong person. So, but the hat was the specific signature that had to be hit 100%, right? For Oppenheimer. And I found one similar to the pictures that I had seen, the research pictures that I had seen. The research pictures, I mean, it was all of the photographs ever done of Oppenheimer. And it worked for this session. And there it was, this thin man in this somewhat oversized suit of gray flannel with a light blue shirt and a green tie. And we put it in front of the camera the next day. I think it was the next day. I think it was the next day. Pins, clips, everything were taken to a lovely, lovely tailor. And he made magic out of it. This ridiculous thing that we put together, which was really a collage. And we put him on film, and it was magic.
Wow. Now, how do you define magic like that? Like, tell the folks at home, what were you seeing that made you say the magic? Was it the performance? Was it the way he carried himself?
I saw everything about Cillian Murphy dissolve into Robert Oppenheimer.
Wow.
And there was nothing that you could ever think, well, that's Cillian playing Robert Oppenheimer. No. It was Robert Oppenheimer. And it was our version of Robert
Sure.
Oppenheimer. So it's you can't stitch by stitch, inch by inch. No. You don't pay attention to it. I always look at a frame as a painting. I look at it as a painting, and I see the characters kind of float in and out of where they're supposed to be. In the case, there was I think there was a desk at this photo shoot, this screen test. There was a desk or a chair that he could sit down. There was cigarettes. He could take his hat off and on. And the fabrication that we were looking at was not far off from where we were going to go. And he just became him. It was the magic of movies. When I say magical illusion or mystical illusion, when you watch something, this is my feeling about it, no matter what the technology, there is a film, there is a veil that here you are, here's the veil, there's the happening. So there's something that is very elusive that you're witnessing take place in front of you. And it either sucks you in or not.
But this did.
This did.
So you knew it was, and it's interesting because Cillian Murphy's been part of his company of players.
I think this was his 6th film.
Yeah, so they know each other, they know the strengths, and I love that kind of. I love when directors have a company of players.
It's very, very, very wonderful because they get to exercise so many different things.
Love that. Now let me ask you this: so this hat. So now you have your mandate. Now is this something you were going to build? Did you have to find? Is it a Milner that makes hats? Did you have to go? Did you know where to go? Like, not since Indiana Jones's fedora, is there going to be a more important hat than Oppenheimer's hat? How?
It's as important, I would say.
Yeah, what is maybe even more so?
Maybe more so now in the present day. Well, we went to a bunch of different ones. We went to Italy, went to New York. Didn't cut it.
Wow.
Didn't cut it. It's such a finite thing. It's crazy. And now, mind you, you're looking at a photograph. You don't have a sample of the hat.
Right.
You're looking at a photograph. You're trying to interpret the color, interpret the fabrication, and the weight of it, the weight of the fabrication. But what you do know is that you really are trying to learn what is the fabrication that will bend a certain way? What is the fabrication that will sit perfectly? What won't make it look too thick? What will be thin enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of the others came close, but then it was Baron hats in Hollywood that made the perfect hat.
You're kidding.
In our backyard.
How did that happen?
Because there was nobody else to go to. There really wasn't anybody else to go to see if you can. Here's the photo. This is what we think the color is. This is what it needs to do. Make me a sample.
How many samples do they have to make?
I think he only had to make one.
Really?
Well, I mean, one, then some changes,
Sure.
and then another one.
So for you, is it like, using the Indiana Jones metaphor, is it like finding the lost ark when you find somebody that can make you this hat?
In this case, it certainly was. It was.
Now, how many? Okay, now you know you're going to. How many hats did you have to make for the movie?
Well, we were on a budget, and so I think that we only made 4.
Really? For the whole movie? 4 hats?
I think we only made 4. I could be wrong. It certainly would have been more than 6. I don't think we made 6. I think we made 4.
Now, you had a stellar cast to work with. And Robert Downey Jr. again, Chaplin himself.
Mr. Chaplin came to be Mr. Strauss.
So when you get to work with a company of players like this, is it exciting for you? Is it intimidating? Because now you have to dress. Everybody's got to be of the same period, but you also have to serve them as actors.
So what's the question?
Well, is it exciting? Is it hard? Is it difficult? Is it intimidating when you have this kind of, you just start the process? And
it equals itself out. Everybody is the same. There isn't anybody that is really treated differently, ever, ever, ever. So particularly then in a story of this, in a company and a story of this nature.
Right.
Everybody comes in the same way. Everybody goes out the same way. Everybody has the same process of Chris and Emma seeing everything that is going to be on camera. Um, Likes, dislikes, conversation, no conversation, etc. Testing, not testing.
Was it important, like when you're looking at these, obviously you had both the military and you had academia and you had the suits, these business suits that people were wearing. Was it important to source the fabrics of the time, or was that kind of authenticity not as important as it was to create an overall aesthetic as opposed to being historically
I think
accurate?
it's part of the same question. I think it's part of the same question. Um, there's one big factor that we have to live with and always take into consideration, and that's this: fabrications of the time. Okay, we're talking what? How many? 80 years ago,
Right.
right? Don't really exist. If you find a piece, there's probably holes. There's probably
Yeah.
it's a mess. As is costumes, frankly. They're falling apart. This is it's a problem that we're faced with every single time we go to work on a film that requires us to look back. Okay. And yes, this is 80 years ago, but it still happens in clothes that are from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. Yeah.
But particularly with woolens, there's moths, it falls apart. It just falls apart. So, what you want to do, what I do, is try to find fabrics that would be similar. Similar, or like, in other words, not to use fabrics that really look contemporary and they don't
Right.
have to be perfect to the time. And then in creating the overall aesthetic, um, everything kind of fits in, like you paint a picture. So,
Do you go back to, do you try and find like designs, like are there patterns from that time you can find from these people who are making suits in 1941?
yeah, I guess they were. I don't do that.
Yeah, yeah, you build everything.
Yeah, but and you look for a certain drape, you look for a certain cut, and so on and so forth. And sometimes, Robert, you just don't have time, and you have to figure it out. You're not making, you're renting, it's falling apart. You are, you're strapped for money. I can only do 6 changes when the person has 10 changes. And in the case, this was a very large cast of men that were all great. And
Hmm.
the thing that actually served us is that they were of the same grouping. There were scientists, okay? And there was a look and a feel of scientists of that time that was very specific. So that if we needed to zig and zag and take from Peter to pay Paul, we did as much as we could because Chris loves to, when all of his guys are in on any particular day, he loves to use them, whether they have words and or listed in scenes or not. So you
Wow.
always have to be
Yeah,
prepared.
ready to go. Now, you also had some great female actresses.
We
There's
sure did.
the feminine energy is really, I think, crucial to this film and the story that's being told. Do you approach them the same way?
Hmm.
So
Exactly the same way.
exactly the same way.
There isn't what I learned in working with Chris is that I think that it would be everything is a very specific, there's a way to do it, right? There's a way to search it, there's a way to fit it, there's a way to show it. There is a conversation that happens. And I think that you just really you do your work. You try to guide in the most specific way that you can
Sure.
in presenting. He's right there in the next room with Emma. They're going to see it for real. And so there isn't any, there were no sketches in this film, no sketches.
Hmm.
We just went to work. We went to work. We brought the clothing in, designed it, made whatever I was going to make, fit it, and and it was seen by Chris and Emma immediately. So there's no time, and we went to work very quickly,
Right.
and we worked very quickly.
Was there a specific color palette that you were using for the women? I mean, maybe as a story point or something that you wanted to bring to maybe to counterpoint the academics and the professors and the
Well, I did
military.
want it to be feminine. I did want it to be feminine, and a little bit of a counterpoint as well. But in regard to Kitty, Emily Blunt, she came from a wealthy background, a refined background, and I think that she it was where she played was going to be the key, or how she what the scenes were. And in fact, in the opening scene where we meet her, there's a blue dress, and we all liked a particular white dress, but Chris liked a blue dress. We learned very quickly, don't say anything, don't fight it, don't fight it, don't fight it, because you're not going to win, and there's no point to it. There really is no point to it when the blue dress, for example, is a perfect choice. It is a little bit more innocence and sophistication in its plainness. And so you learn that. But what Emily's character was great to work with was, how do we break her down? How do we deconstruct her? Because she's a woman that is taken off her course, and
Mm.
she is one that will infuse ambition into her man, discounting her ambition. It's discounting her ambition, and she projects it onto him. And it doesn't fare well with her. She becomes a bit of a drunk. And in that kind of haphazardness, how are we going to deconstruct that in a place where she's not happy being, and how can we convey that without it looking like a costume? You see, that's really what, I think that for the most part, I really, really, really try throughout my career, and of course on this film as well, to not have something look like a costume. There's a other dimension that it has to
Yeah.
look like. And so there's a reality in that. There's a reality in the presentation, but yet a tactileness, something
Mhm.
has to come through. So Emily was very, very much like that, and she was all for it. Everybody was all for it, and we just did it. And when it came to Florence, Florence was the passion. I mean, I broke that down. Emily's the ambition, Florence is the passion, and the other woman, Ruth, which we didn't see much of, was the academia. She was academia. So in Florence being the passion, Florence didn't have. She needed to be able to. I needed to be able to feel her in her body. There weren't many photos to go off of
Right.
with her. So I needed to feel her body moving. I needed to feel her in the clothes. It was the 30s. It was a good time for having to, pursue that. And the fabrications were a bit more sensual, and so on. The colors being the same.
That's interesting. And now, when you say that she was the passion, and then Emily Blunt was the ambition, is that a conversation you would have had with Christopher Nolan?
I think we did have it. I think we did have it. I mean, the conversation, that kind of conversation doesn't have to be a big conversation. It could be something that's mentioned and then shown.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, so you'd show that. So, because I would think that's a great guiding principle for you, or to have that kind of understanding. And again, I think it's one of your great strengths. All of that comes through in the film. People might not be aware that you've given them this understanding of who these characters are through your clothes, but you're very good. Your work for the last, 35, 40 years almost has
Yeah.
always done that.
Thank you.
And I think that it absolutely came through. Now, let me ask you this. knowing that this film was going to be shot with IMAX cameras, and a lot of the time, photochemical, and he's shooting on film. So photochemically, things happen with patterns and colors, but when you're using an IMAX camera, the resolution is so high. Was there ever a time when you had to like tone down certain maybe patterns in fabrics or just the way they looked? Like if woolens looked a certain way, that they wouldn't work underneath the camera, the scrutiny of the camera at all?
No. And the reason being is because a lot of it went so fast. There was no time to do that type of testing or corrections or so on.
Yeah, I was just
You could
curious.
just you would have to. I mean, I'll be perfectly frank. I didn't consider it. I really didn't. We knew where we were going and what we were doing, and we did have a couple of tests. We tested Killian, of course. We tested Emily. We tested Florence, and we tested Robert.
Mm.
And so anything that I was thinking about at that time or wherever we were at in our fittings was put before the cameras. We saw it for
Well,
real.
and your incredible cinematographer and Christopher Nolan would
Without a
know
question.
themselves.
Without
Yeah.
a question.
It's interesting because digital capture technology, sometimes you end up getting problems with moire patterns and things like that, that just because the way that the image is captured.
Of course. But I would tend to stay away from that anyway. I would anything that is kind of doing a little something crazy,
Yeah.
I stay away from. But I think that all of that was kind of worked out in a way, um, in the best way we could for the time that we had. Because, when you go to work in November, you have 3 weeks. You go to work in December, you have 2.5 weeks. Then you go to work in January, you have 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and then a little bit in February when the cast comes in, more so. And then you go to shoot in February. So this was very quick, really, really quick. So I guess it took enough pre-planning, and enough showing to get us out the gate. And then whatever the adjustments, and one of the adjustments was, it was a very, very subtle, obviously, it was a period kind of palette that we used. There was nothing that was irregular about that. And whatever the girls added, they added. And a couple of party scenes added some color. And Hoyte always said that he wanted it to feel inky, like just inky. Fine. That's all I knew.
Inky.
Okay, inky.
Like dipping a pen into an inkwell, inky?
Yeah, that's how I interpret it.
Yeah.
That kind of inky. And not precious. Definitely not precious. And that had to be really, taken. I think there were two things that added to being able to make this non-precious period film be what it is because I feel that it's messy. I feel it's a messy film. In the costumes, in the wardrobe, in the people, how it's presented. It feels messy. There's nothing that it feels like you colored outside the lines a little bit.
Wow. Okay.
That's what it really feels like to me. So when people say things of it's a great suit movie, it's a great, oh wait, hold on, time out. I think I better go back and watch this. But I still get the same. There are great suits in it.
It is a great suit.
It's a great suit movie, and I love suits so much. And I love men in suits. I just do. It's part of my DNA.
It's been a world I've always wanted to live in. Whenever you watch even movies like something like the Coen Brothers Hudsucker Proxy, everyone's wearing suspenders and the beautiful suits, or Marilyn's own Untouchables.
That's right.
Like those suits don't look period to me. they're like super suits.
They are super suits because men become superheroes wearing super suits.
Don Draper in Mad Men.
Think about it. Gordon Gekko. Think about it. You
Even
are.
Lenny Nero, Ray Fiennes in Strange Days, is always wearing his punk super suits.
There you go. So there's something that happens to a man. I have never looked at a man in a suit and said, "Oh, it's just a man in a suit." Never, ever. And maybe I do, Robert, try to heighten it just slightly because we're watching a film and making sure that that man expresses who he is in wearing a suit. And maybe some people take it for granted, like a man puts on a suit, that's it, but
No.
I don't.
Yeah, no, and you can tell. And there was something about that because all these men did have, you think they're working on the Manhattan Project, their suits are their intellectual power is that's what they do.
Right.
They're the Justice League of
that's
super
exactly
suit
right.
people.
They are supermen.
Yes.
They are supermen and they are superheroes within that genre. And I think Killian leads the pack. I mean, he is a lawman from the beginning of time, and certainly.
And he even acts. I mean, his performance is so indelible. But he acts like in a way he's like a Superman.
He was, Prometheus.
But
he gave them fire.
I know.
He destroyed them.
He brought it down.
He brought it down. But that power, what I really believe about Oppenheimer is he really did get a spiritual message in the early days, in the 30s.
Well, yeah, and maybe it was divinity.
I think I personally feel that it was. That this is what his purpose I believe everybody has a purpose. And sometimes you know it and sometimes you don't. And I believe that Oppenheimer did. And when it just becomes part of the fabric of his being, till he actualizes, till his friend tells him, "Take that uniform off, you look like an idiot." And he puts his suit on and he puts his hat on. He's born.
Right.
He is born for his purpose in this lifetime. And I think it leaves an indelible mark.
Do you think because you think this way that you are, because I've always believed that, especially in filmmaking, if there's more, call it a philosophy behind whatever it is that you do, it does come through on screen. And you talked earlier about how there's something happening, a second sight or whatever. But if you're thinking in those kind of terms and you're giving a philosophy to what it is you're doing, it can't help but come through on the screen. You might not even be aware of it.
Which most of the time I'm not. Most of the time I'm not aware of it, because if I have to give it something more, I have to look at it, I have to study it, I have to think, oh, is this doing what I want it to do? I'm off somewhere. But if it just evolves in a way that, I don't know, it just evolves. I can't even tell you how much time passes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then I'm cool. And then if it comes across, great. If it doesn't,
sometimes it's out of your control. You can do it.
Once I've done it, it is out of my control.
Now, I started kind of jokingly saying about the zeitgeist, this whole Barbenheimer thing that happened, and a marketing department couldn't. The fact that this movie, which, by the way, compared to blockbusters, it was relatively not as expensive as a $200 million, were you surprised at how this movie became, along with Barbie, but this movie became the movie of the summer of 2023, that everybody, it doesn't matter who it was, everyone had to go see this film?
It was the greatest surprise. It was the greatest surprise. And it was genius. It was just genius how it all happened. It was the greatest surprise. And I loved that it was men and women. It was men and women. I loved that so much that I thought, well, it won't ever fail. It is too big to fail. It is men and women at its core. And I loved that people got dressed up to go to the movies. I got
in period suits too.
in suits, whether they were girls or boys or whatever, didn't matter. I loved that the people who came in pink changed their clothes to wear black and white. And when they went to, I just thought it was genius. It was an absolute experience that actually is kind of the same. It's an experience, and it's an immersion, and it's an experience. And I think that watching Oppenheimer, sitting in the audience, is an immersive experience.
Incredibly so.
And it hits every one of your senses. I think it's quite original. Quite original. I don't think it fits into a category. Every time I see the word a biography, I go, it pisses me off, because I do think it's a portrait. It's not a biopic.
Right.
It's a portrait, and it's an original portrait. And I think that Chris definitely painted outside the lines, and that's why it resonates the way it does. It's a thriller. You sit at the edge of your seat.
It's a tragedy in a way.
It's a tragedy. It's a big tragedy. You see the humanity on every level, and you see the otherworldly. You see the superpower. So you hit many, many different levels. And with Barbie, it is its own. It's a lighter version, without a question of a doubt, of kind of some of those same primal things that have to be thought of when you think about Barbie afterwards. It is men and women.
Yeah,
and
no, of course.
Definitely, it's very stylish. It's very purposeful in its palette.
Yes.
Very purposeful in its palette. And it gives you something to think about in the end. And in our film, in Oppenheimer, you are faced with, it gives you something to think about in the end.
How is it for you, I guess to wrap this up, how is it for you looking back on your career? Like you said, how something comes out, you still have to put in all the work you can do and make it the best it can be. And you don't necessarily know how it's going to come out. You only hope for the best. To go from something like Wall Street, which again, when it came out, covers of magazines, like you said, people are dressing and slicking their hair back like Gordon Gekko. It became a cultural moment that continued on beyond the time it was even in the theater. You say Gordon Gekko now, everyone knows exactly who you're talking about. And that was in 1987. This summer of 2023, you were now a part of the same kind of a thing, cultural zeitgeist moment, but this film will resonate. People that maybe didn't know much about Oppenheimer or hadn't read, part of it is because of your work. I mean, you're able to, I've always believed that actors can only bring what they can bring when they feel comfortable in what they're wearing and how they look. They have to know that you've had that in a career. What does that mean to you personally?
It means that I've touched somebody. It means a lot to me, because what I've been able to do was able to touch people in a way that allows them a bigger horizon. It allows them a broader way of thinking or feeling. I feel that communication, at the root of it all, it's about communication. So whether it's communicating with yourself or others through what you see, feel, and are part of, is the most important thing on this planet. And aside from taking care of the planet and so on, and being human, and being able to feel other humans. And so the work that I've been able to do, it always, when I'm able to do it and it can communicate and it touches another person in their heart, because that's what I believe happens. You get touched somewhere in that center,
Right.
and it stays with you on whatever level it's meant to stay with you for, but it touches you. And you were one person watching that screen, and it stayed with you. So whatever I've been able to express, and you've picked up on, maybe it brightens your day a bit. Maybe it'll alter certain ways in which you think. I don't know, but it's yours for the taking.
I just love that you told me this story about you did an interview on a podcast, and she had done the podcast or did so much research into you and called you one of the first influencers.
Yeah.
And the beginning of your career when you worked in fashion. Well, now as a costume designer for over multiple decades for motion pictures, and certainly this is not the end of your career, but you're the ultimate influencer. You've gone from being one of the first influencers to on Oppenheimer being one of the ultimate influencers.
Now, how do you think I influenced?
Well, I mean, look.
What would you say?
I would say this. I would say that you have a whole generation of young people. Young people.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that embraced Oppenheimer and Barbenheimer, and they were doing it as a fun thing. But there's a lot of people that went back and are looking at those suits. Guys are looking at those suits, and they're going because people look good, and maybe there's going to be a whole explosion in academia of 20-something, 19, 20-year-old kids getting their grad degrees. Who knows, some tech baron might look at that movie and go, I think we're going to dress like him today. Or all those academics, because those suits are good-looking suits.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, wouldn't that be wild?
It is wild. I do get many, many notes. Many, many notes. Where can I'm a big fan. I like this. I like that. But of course, it's the hat.
Right.
Everybody wants the hat.
And after this interview, that you told everybody where to get it.
They want the hat. They want the belt buckle. They want the hat. They want his belt buckle. And they want his suits.
It's too bad you couldn't trademark that stuff under your own brand.
Oh, Universal owns it. I'm sorry.
I know.
It's Universal's for life. But it makes me feel good when I see somebody kind of be able to, an actor become who they're supposed to, who they are meant to play. And I love it. Truthfully, I love it when they look good. It's just who I am. That's just what I do. I always used to say, when I found, I just like a couple of weeks ago, when I was taking a test to become a member of 829, the union in New York, you had to do sketches. They'd give you different assignments and you had to sketch the whole thing. And I found them with my daughter, and she had never seen them before. And I went, wow, these are very nice sketches. I must say, they're very nice. And I didn't really know anything, but they were very nice sketches. But what it was is that they all looked like things you could wear. It wasn't all contemporary at all. They were period things. They looked like things you could wear. And the fabrics I chose were contemporary fabrics, unknowing. I didn't know anything. I never went to costume school. And what I used to say at that time was, I don't think I could do like a medieval show because I can't relate to that type of fabrication. Now, granted, that is 35, 40 years ago, whatever it was, and there are different ways around that same peg now. But it's something that is that influence, that the way in which you feel and see something and translate it is what sets everybody apart. And that's what makes our community be so special, I think.
Well, on that note, I think that, you kind of are your own atomic bomb in a way. You've always been a firecracker in terms of and maybe this movie is the ultimate example of it'll stand as the ultimate example of your craft. I mean,
I feel really, really, really fortunate, and with much gratitude, I do say this, is that given this opportunity to do this film, that I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect from it. I didn't like to necessarily see the end before the process. And certainly that was never did. I mean, I even bought a T-shirt that says Barbenheimer and an image. I had to have one.
Right.
I had to have one. How could I not have one from this period of time?
Well, let me ask you one last question. When you're working on a film like this, working on a movie, you can never, I've tried to explain this to people, working on films and being on sets does not translate at all to the experience of watching a movie that you've worked on for the first time. There's no way it could. What was it like for you when you first saw this movie? You said you've seen it multiple times in multiple different formats. The first time you saw this movie, how did you feel?
I cried throughout the film. I cried throughout the film. So that tells you how I felt. I was like, wow. I was like you the first time you saw it. When I saw this film for the first time, I didn't pay attention to anything but the movie in front of me. I was moved by the music. I was moved by the emotional resonance. I was moved by the character's work, by the story, by sitting on the edge of my seat. I didn't pay attention to the clothes at all. In fact, the person that I was with, I said, "Oh my God, I'm speechless. Was it okay?" Because I didn't see it.
Yeah, well, and that's the amazing.
I didn't see anything but the film.
It's hard to explain to people that no matter how long you've worked on a movie, it has no bearing on what it's like to sit down and watch a movie that you've worked on.
With an audience. With an audience in a spectacular theater, watching it on a great screen. I was like, wow. I was like a little kid watching a movie for the first time. And it took my breath away.
And it was the intensity of this film. Even the shots of somebody walking up to a building on a college campus takes on, you're like, whoa.
It's every single shot, everything. But what I was most proud of, what I was really most proud of, even though I was speechless, was that it was a magnificent, seamless film.
Yeah.
It was a work of art. It was an original work of art that could not fit in a category, could not be more, it could not fit into, well, it's a biopic, it's this, it's that. No. It was an original work of art that Chris Nolan created in a way that no one has told this type of story before.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because after I saw this movie the first time, I thought about one of my favorite movies of all time, which is All That Jazz. No one could have made that movie but Bob Fosse, not just because it was about himself.
No,
but the way it was made. And this movie made me think about All That Jazz, not because they have anything to do with each other, but it's the fact that only one person could have made this particular film, and nobody other than Christopher Nolan could have made it.
Agree. He is a spectacular genius. And it was, I'll just share one more story. Okay. There was a period of time in the Los Alamos, when we were shooting the Los Alamos section, and it was tiring. And we were working really, really quick. The altitudes were high and so on. And the amount of work that you had to really produce each day was plentiful. And you're hard on yourself, right? Okay, so I think that we had a moment where before the end of the day and before dailies, that I could go back to the hotel and just chill out for a minute before dailies. Now, when you watch dailies, it is all not selects. It's dailies. You could be there 3 hours. That's what it is.
Right.
You know, you could sleep if you want, but you're there for the amount of time, and it's you haven't seen this in years. And really,
do you get to watch them on film?
Yes, this is all on film, and there's the dailies trailer. So there's always dinner before, and my assistant and myself went to dinner, and we were just sitting there. Well, we must have looked exhausted because we were graced with the presence of a wonderful gaffer and best boy, Adam and Kyle. And they sat down, and always very, very cheerful. And Adam said, "So how you doing? You're doing a good job, guys. Really, how you doing? How you doing?" And we said, "Okay." And he said, "No, you're doing a good job, but I'm going to tell you something. And just remember what I'm going to tell you." And we said, "Okay, what is it?" And he said, "The day you finish this film will not be like any other day on any movie that you've ever worked on, any project you've ever worked on. You will know that you have worked on something that is unlike anything that you will ever experience." And we went, "Right. I've experienced some like things that are a bit unusual, but I don't have to say this, but he's very, very firm in his conviction." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Mark my words, you will feel as if you have won the Super Bowl. You are working on a Super Bowl now. And when that rap is called, the end of that last day, you have won the Super Bowl. And you just remember that feeling." And Robert, that's the God's honest truth. That's what it feels like.
Well, Ellen Mirojnick, I can't thank you enough for being on this episode of the Designing Hollywood podcast here at Universal, the studio that had the foresight to make this movie.
Thank goodness.
I mean, when a lot of other studios might not have.
They might have said, "No, I don't know. Who is that person?" They would have said, "Who is that person?" Right?
Absolutely. So thank you for being here. It's great to have you here again.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure, Robert.
That was great.
Thank you for tuning in to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Universal's costume department, the best in the world. And for your consideration in all categories, Universal's Oppenheimer.
A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from The John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeek Singularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.